Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Bettina Shea, and I'm an associate professor at California State University, Long Beach. I'm excited to join you all today. Wish I could be there with you in person, but I'm grateful to Jen and Jess for inviting me to speak on this very important topic. So before I get started, I just wanted to introduce myself and say hello so you can put a name with a face, and then I'll jump into my slides for the presentation. In a time of increasing polarization in the United States, teachers and teacher educators have unique opportunities to create honest spaces for dialogue, but developing classrooms that can serve as these spaces is not an easy task. In my part of our presentation, I'd like to draw from instruction occurring the night after the contentious 2016 presidential election in the U.S. to talk about the ways in which teacher educators can authentically promote critical conversations that challenge teacher candidates to think about and teach through a lens of critical literacy. Through this incident, one can see that the teacher education classroom has powerful possibility to serve as an important thinking and healing space, but that the work of being critical is not simple. This incident also highlights the ways in which teacher educators must consider voices present and absent from the conversations to engender true dialogue across perspective. Prior to the announcement of the results of the November 2016 elections, the topic of our course on the day following the election was critical literacy. This was fortuitous, but I hadn't actually thought that I would connect my content to the election, although I could have given the ways in which the media portrayed both candidates. Instead, I thought that I would focus on disciplinary critical literacy topics that felt somewhat safer, including the seemingly unconscious exclusion of women and people of color from perceptions of famous scientists or mathematicians through the use of social media searches. However, when the election results were announced, I knew that we would need to use the literacy classroom that week to begin the process of sense-making related not only to written texts about the election, but also the meaning that could be made by the election of a presidential candidate who had run on a platform that had seemed extreme to many, including mainstream media, his supporters, and his opposition. If my students as future teachers did not begin exploring how to make sense of the recent election, its implications, and the political era we were now entering, they would likely have a difficult time supporting their students in sense-making processes related to both text and the world around them. Beginning with an acknowledgement of the election results, I asked students to quick write their initial hopes and fears about the election and share these thoughts with partners. Given that it was late in the semester, I knew that candidates tended to sit with similar peers throughout the semester, creating default safe spaces. We then looked at representations of American through a Google image search and discussed the implications of who was and wasn't included in the images that were produced. Finally, we looked at text from 3 different sources, one with a slight conservative bias, one with a slight liberal bias, and one that was more extreme in its left leanings. The goal was to look at the text, context, and subtext of each article in relation to the same event, the election. Many of the students used the class to process the election results and implications. Students' thoughts in response to the opening quick write were raw and honest, ranging from shock and dismay to uncertainty as they considered the results. Hannah, a white world languages teacher candidate, Clinton supporter, and LGBTQ rights advocate, began class with the tweet, "Feeling like ignorance and hate won against reason and love. What does that mean for teachers? Are we still relevant?" Gary, a white social studies teacher candidate, expressed concern for students. "I fear for kids who are surrounded by people whose ideologies of equality and peace are backwards and discriminative." Tom, a Latino science candidate, stated personal frustration. "I feel cheated and bamboozled." Jeremy, an Asian American math candidate, expressed hesitancy. "I'm just very uncertain about how the future looks and what to expect. I had my doubts about both candidates." At the end of the session, most students' feedback was encouraging. Jim, a white science teacher candidate, who initially declined to participate in the quick write, later wrote in his exit slip, "I didn't want to get out of bed today, but this class was cathartic. Talking and writing helps. Thanks." His was one of many positive responses from the class. I left the class that night confident that I had provided a safe space for my teacher candidates to debrief and engage with their thoughts and in conversation with others about the election. But whose voice was missing? It had never even occurred to me that there was an absence of critique by conservative voices. I had naively assumed that the silence was because, in a liberal state, in a generally but not exclusively liberal field, conservative students were just not present in my classroom space. There had been some sentiments expressed that belied more conservative or less politically engaged thinking. Jeremy's expression of reservation about both candidates, and Luz, a Latina English teacher candidate, who admitted that she hadn't voted because she hadn't really thought of it as important. But nothing seemed openly critical or challenging. Just as I was patting myself on the back for having navigated this critical political moment in an adept, inclusive, and thoughtful way, I saw one last tweet, a photo of an exit slip that said, "Today confirmed my belief that I will not be talking politics in my classroom. I am open to having talks with the students about certain current events happening in the US or around the world." This tweet was written by Armando, a Hispanic military veteran in the class. Upon following up with Armando privately, he expressed concerns about parental or administrative backlash and about teachers' responsibilities not to impose their beliefs on youth who are often very impressionable. He then discussed how personally he had experienced alienation and disenfranchisement within his own family who had failed to acknowledge his perspectives. Armando noted how his family members had made ignorant and disrespectful comments towards him, not understanding the ways in which his identity as a veteran greatly influenced the way he approached the world. He attributed his family's lack of understanding to their Hispanic culture and privileging that identity in a way that led them to dismiss his experiences and perspectives. While he was willing to hear others out and respected what I had tried to do in the classroom, Armando did not want to engage in political conversations in the classroom. We followed up during an in-person office hours where we engaged in respectful political conversations from very different places, based on our experiences and identities. I listened, asked some questions, and voiced some personal concerns to which Armando responded. It was clear that we wouldn't agree, but that our deep respect for one another allowed us to listen, consider, and engage with one another's beliefs. Armando reminded me of the importance of humanization if we are really to support critical conversations. After our conversation, I began to think of ways to honor my beliefs, support students in ways consistent with critical literacy, and facilitate conversations that might push our learning community to think beyond our individual perspectives. Several months later, a colleague presented on facilitating difficult dialogue in the current political climate. Drawing from the notion of multipartiality in intergroup dialogue from the higher education literature, she reviewed the central tenets of multipartial intergroup dialogue facilitation and shared how she had used it with her students in post-election discussions. Multipartiality focuses on balancing social power independent of and in contrast to dominant norms of society. Emphasis is placed on equal participation and equal attention to the multiple identities and experiences of all participants in the conversation in an attempt to share social power across groups that in society are stratified. Just as my multiple identities and experiences shaped my approach to the post-election critical literacy conversation, Armando's identity as a veteran, marginalized by his own family, which he attributed to their ethnic background, shaped his perspectives on the conversation. In my classroom as a professor, it is my responsibility to promote dialogue that allows for multiple identities to coexist in understanding, even if there is no eventual agreement. Just as my conversation with Armando in office hours had impacted me, I felt confident that had he shared his views in a thoughtfully facilitated class session, he and his colleagues would have benefited from the ensuing conversation. It would not have been an easy conversation, but it would have modeled the practices that educators must engage in if we are to support our students through difficult dialogues. Since the election, I have been working towards greater multi-partiality in difficult discussions in my classroom. In my current class, while exploring various identity and literacy student scenarios that get at issues of marginalization based on gender, sexual orientation, religion, ethnicity, and documentation status, I included a scenario of a student who felt discriminated against as a white male, based on an actual situation at a student teaching site where I am a university supervisor. The teacher candidates in the group examining this scenario struggled with it, allowing us to unpack our roles as educators and how we can better support all students, including those who experience marginality in contested ways. After class, a white male student confessed to me his experiences feeling marginalized within the program and feeling that he needed to hide parts of his identity in order to feel acceptance. His willingness to approach me allowed me again, as with Armando, to hear and acknowledge his experiences and to push him to consider how his experiences within the program were experiences many marginalized groups felt regularly. This allowed us to discuss the importance of intersectional perspectives in informing how we read the world around us. The imperative to teach critical literacy has never been more urgent. As the U.S. and international communities see increasing incidents of extremist and ideological violence, educators and teacher educators must be prepared to negotiate for themselves the messages and false equivalencies in text and the world around them. And they must help their teacher candidates to negotiate these ideas as well. As teacher educators, we must model the work and think explicitly about our role in promoting such reflection for all students. We must recognize our own complicity to systems of power that cause us to construct our courses in particular ways that fail to disrupt or question the commonplace. This is the work of critical literacy, to disrupt the commonplace, interrogate multiple viewpoints, focus on social political issues, and to take action to promote social justice. It is not comfortable work, but more than simple discomfort is necessary if oppression is to be confronted in classroom spaces, and if we are to build coalition across deeply held beliefs to make progress towards collective freedom and education, even from places of disagreement. Thank you.